So yeah, my name is Erick Mack, and I've been a journalist for about 25 years, and over the past year, I've grown fascinated with this very weird thing that nobody understands called Web3, and also DAOs. So I've formed a DAO myself with some people that are smarter than me that understand the intersection of media and Web3 and where they can work together. If you don't know, a DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. You can think of it as sort of a cross between a startup and a social club and also a cooperative. And what JournoDAO does is functions as a social network for people working at the intersection of media and Web3, and we would love to have any of you come and join us. I think most people here are interested in at least one of those things, and maybe both because you're here. We also provide advisory services for organizations that are looking to bridge the gap between traditional media and these bizarre Web3 ways. And we've got an incubator where we're developing some new tools and concepts to use Web3 to help upgrade journalism that I'll get to in a minute. Our community has over 125 people in it right now, and these are some of our core contributors and founding members, and everyone up here had a hand in developing this presentation and also the workshop that I'll give at 3 o'clock later today downstairs. But before we can understand Web3, it's worth understanding what Web 1 and Web 2 are, and it's funny because nobody ever used these terms until we started using the term Web 3, and then people were asking about Web 1 and Web 2, so we had to come up with definitions for that. It's not quite like that, but when we think of Web 1, we got to go all the way back to the 1990s and the earliest generation of the internet, when it was mainly people publishing on the early infrastructure and protocols of the internet. And when I say protocol, what I mean is, like in this corner right here, that HTTP, the P is for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Another one is SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. You know that as email. And so for the first few years of the internet, it was basically just that static images and text that you read, and you're pretty much done with it. And then about a decade later, in the early aughts, we start to see for the first time companies building platforms on top of this infrastructure that gives us the services that we all use today, like LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. These things, companies that built what we used to call walled gardens. In other words, platforms and environments in which the companies control the environment and all the content inside of it. So if Web 1 gave publishers the opportunity to, for the first time, access a truly global audience easily and cheaply, what Web 2 did is make everyone in that global audience a potential publisher themselves. And it's a little hard to understate just how much such a historic change in the way that we communicate and collaborate with each other, how journalism wasn't really ready for this, particularly journalism at the local level, at like the smaller newspaper level. But throughout the entire ecosystem, the rapidity of this shift really kind of caused chaos and gave us a lot of these problems that I think you would be pretty familiar with at this point, some of the common criticisms of journalism today. And I want to call out the idea of news deserts. If you're not familiar with that, that's these areas in which so many local newspapers have shut down that you have entire communities, entire counties in large parts of my country, including where I live, where there's no local news source or only one news source, and we'll come back to that. We used to say that Web 1 and Web 2 were disrupting journalism, but I see it, particularly on the local level, as more a case of devastating journalism. Not by any bad intention. I'm not blaming Facebook for wanting to go out and destroy journalism, obviously. But this is the collateral damage that such a rapid change left us. And of course, this is not a literal representation of journalism in rural America, but this is a metaphor that I want to use. This is from a story that I covered early in my career. This is Greensburg, Kansas in 2007, the day after an F5 tornado rolled through and literally destroyed an entire town overnight. It's one of the more powerful tornadoes ever to hit the United States. And so when I think of kind of the rubble that was left at newspapers that closed that I worked at, this image comes to mind quite a bit. But the thing is, I'm sure most people here would agree that journalism is worth saving and preserving and rebuilding on all levels. And so I think that we have a similar foundation that we can rebuild from between Web3 and journalism. And I take inspiration from Greensburg, Kansas, the slide I showed you earlier, because this is Greensburg, Kansas today. After the storm, the community got together and resolved to not only rebuild, but to rebuild as a model sustainable community. And so it's very different today, and they did become a model green community. And so I think that just as Greensburg was left with very little but a foundation to build back from, I see the same thing for journalism because it shares similar foundations with Web3 in terms of the ethos between Web3 and journalism. Both believe in the importance of transparency. Both have a natural suspicion of centralized power and a desire to create a permanent and immutable historical record. So what I'm proposing is that we can rebuild a more sustainable way using some Web3-powered pillars. And I'm not saying that Web3 is going to solve all of journalism's problems. It's not a panacea, but these are tools that can help, and I'm going to suggest a few ways. The first way is something called onboarding, which is just a term that we use in Web3 as shorthand for the fact that there is a very steep learning curve to Web3, and that it freaks a lot of people out because it involves words like smart contracts that nobody understands. But onboarding also refers to the fact that there is a very strong ethos of community within the Web3 community, and whereas Web 2 demonstrated the value of communities, it turns out we all really want to gather online in Facebook groups or wherever. Web 3 can also give communities the power to organize, collaborate, coordinate, and here's the new part, to take ownership of the value that they create for the benefit of the community itself. And one of the most common structures to do this in Web 3 today is a DAO. And it's kind of remarkable what many DAOs have been able to accomplish already, from building tools to crowdfunding money to preserve priceless antiquities. One has even sent a few of their members to space. That happened on Blue Origin about a month ago. And of course, there's been some notable failures. It turns out that if you crowdfund $42 million to try to buy a copy of the US Constitution at auction, well, it's not a very good thing for the people you're bidding against to know how much money you raised, so that effort did not succeed. But what I'm getting at here is that, and part of why I'm here, is that I think it's important for Web3 and for the traditional journalism world to get to know each other and figure out how we can work together. So the other pillar that I wanted to talk about is how Web3 can help move media from an extractive to a more expansive ecosystem. And what do I mean when I talk about extractive? Well, it turns out that your social media content has value. Who knew? Not all of it. Some of it is worthless. But all of that social media value is harvested by Web 2 platforms. I mean, there is content share. I mean, there is revenue sharing from platforms like YouTube, but it's still dictated by the platform itself. And also that value is harvested by reporters like me that make a living off of it doing things like this. So a lot of my work is actually covering astronomy. And I did this story last year. This is about Comet Leonard, which was a beautiful comet. And it was captured by an amateur astronomer here using some pretty expensive equipment that requires some real skill to operate. And they posted some beautiful photos on Twitter, which I took and embedded in my story. And I happen to know that Dr. Janetta here enjoyed the fact that I shared their images out to the world. But the bottom line is, I was paid for the use of those images. Twitter made money off the use of those images. As far as I know, Dr. Janetta didn't make anything. And this is part of an aspect of my work that's really begun to bother me over the years. So when we talk about how we can change that, let's go back again to Web 1. And let's just talk about how value flows in these various iterations of the online economy. In Web 1, you have value flowing from the publisher to the reader in terms of immediate access to information. and then back from the reader to the publisher in terms of revenue and eyeballs to sell to advertisers. This is your basic business model for media. What changed with Web 2 is the addition of access to information, audience, and dopamine flowing from the publisher to the reader, and value flowing from the reader to the publisher in terms of not just eyeballs, but also now all sorts of personal data that can be used and sold elsewhere. So what we're proposing with Web3 is a different model in which value flows from the publisher to the reader in terms of contribution to the creation of valuable content, and value flows from the reader to the publisher in terms of contributions to the creation of valuable content, and the circle of life goes on. So what is actually different about all of this? What's new at the bottom there is that the engagement and creation can be moderated, measured, and facilitated through tokens and smart contracts, those scary words that nobody understands. But all you need to know about what that means is that all of this is now transparent and community controlled. And here's a few examples of some tools that we've been working with. This is one called Futuro. It's a mobile app that journalists can use while they're in the field reporting to take a picture, and you can attach text and other story elements to it. It then is published on the blockchain as an NFT, and the time and location data for the photo is captured along with this. And this provides a couple of things. One, that NFT can be monetized for the creator as another revenue stream. And also that location data and time data stored transparently on-chain provides a level of resistance against censorship, manipulation, and deletion. This is another tool that we use called Unlock Protocol that allows creators and journalists to attach new benefits to NFTs that they mint. Just a couple of examples, you could use an NFT purchased by one of your subscribers to manage their subscription, and that same NFT can also function as a ticket to a real-life event like, say, Media Party or something like that. This is Mirror. This is another Web3 publishing platform that allows writers to publish their writing as an NFT, and we'll be using this in the workshop later on today that I'll lead. Another way Web3 can benefit journalism is putting the actual product of reporting and the constituent parts of that reporting, the primary sources, interviews, whatever, what have you, the data that goes into producing a piece of journalism and putting it actually on the blockchain. And this is something that news organizations have already been experimenting with. The Associated Press put election results on the Chainlink blockchain a few years ago to help settle prediction markets. And we're working with some other platforms that are doing things like this. Factland DAO here in the corner is building a fact-checking platform that is blockchain-based, and that's Futuro, and Ocean Protocol is also a data-based blockchain. And among other reasons to do this, putting all of the data on-chain, we think will open up new ways for anonymous sources to interact with journalists using a technology called zero-knowledge proofs. That is a whole other talk. But also, we think there's potential to guard against deep fakes and other illegitimate news sources. One of the less sexy ways that journalists can use blockchain is to build out a sort of versioning capability. We publish stories and they can go through any number of edits, corrections, updates, changes, but there's really no standardized way for the audience to track those changes. And so by putting those versions in an immutable and transparent record, we think it will help build back up trust with audiences. This is a really cool one that's we've also been working on. It's a group called Diamond DAO is building a platform for Chainverse, and I'll just say for any journalists in the audience, all of the blockchain transaction data is, in most cases, is of course transparent and available for anyone to look at, and there's a lot of investigative stories in this data. It's very difficult to parse, and so this is a tool that's being built to help parse all that data and visualize it, and I think there's immense opportunities there for journalists. So here's the fourth thing that we're proposing is as we develop all these tools and figure out the best ways to use Web3 to better journalism, we want a place to put it into practice and use as a sandbox And so this is where we go back to the news deserts that I was talking about earlier. And we're hoping to crowdfund to buy a few local papers in coordination with the communities that otherwise might not have a local news source, so that they can benefit from a more sustainable news source using these new Web3 superpowers. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from this, it's that with Web3, we can be more expansive rather than extractive. And on the local level that I keep returning to, I see Web3 as the potential of citizen journalism recognized and civic life revitalized in the process. Now, if you want to take this even one step further to a distant future where we have media outlets that are all communicating and coordinating with Web3 tools and all part of this larger blockchain network, that leads us to a new structure for wire services, which I see as DAOs. And that is a whole other talk that I don't have time to get into today. But just know that I think we're on the very, very early beginning of some very big transformations. And that is our team, and these are our founding members. And if you're interested, this is where you can find us. I have a workshop at 3 o'clock where we're going to be going through just some really basic aspects of some of this stuff. This was all very high-level ideas. And at 3 o'clock, we'll go over the basics of setting up a Web3 wallet and interacting with the blockchain, doing some basic transactions so that all this can start to have some concrete basis in your mind. So invite you to that, and that's it for me. Muchísimas gracias.